All right. Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive, where, well, as you know, we like to just really take apart fascinating sources, get right down to the core, the insights, and today is no different.
No, not at all.
So today we are diving into the ideas of Dr. Bruce H. Lipton. And this is from his book, La Biologia de la Creencia.
Right.
And specifically, we have some excerpts here that you're kind enough to translate from Spanish for me. And I got to say, some fascinating stuff in here.
It's amazing.
And our mission, if you will, with this deep dive is really to uncover how your beliefs, right? So what you believe in the world around you, so that environment, how they actually influence your biology down to your cells.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
And I think that, as we kind of explore this, we're gonna have some aha moments, some connections that you may not have made before. So let's get started.
Sounds good.
What kind of jumps out at you from these excerpts?
Well, I think what's really interesting and compelling is just Dr. Lipton's own personal story and how he sort of came to question this idea that our genes are really in control of our lives.
Okay.
And he even talks about feeling like, at some point that he was kind of destined for failure and then realizing that he could actually change that perception.
Interesting.
So that's kind of a good place to start, I think.
Yeah, let's unpack that a little bit. I mean, that sounds like, his personal journey kind of tied into this bigger maybe shift in how people are thinking about things scientifically. There's a part in here about a scientist, H.F. Neyhout, suggesting that genetic control has become almost like a metaphor. What's the thinking there?
Yeah, what he was arguing was that genes are important,
right.
Absolutely, but they don't just like switch themselves on and off. They need these cues from the environment
to be expressed. So it's not something inherent to the gene that makes it active or not, but rather it's signals coming from outside of the gene itself.
That makes sense. It's like it's like you have all the ingredients for a recipe,
right?
But you still need like the instructions on when and how to combine them, and that's kind of like the environmental signal.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's interesting. So the excerpt then kind of brings in this concept of epigenetics and uses this, I think, really helpful analogy of a television tuning knob and a broadcast signal. Can you explain that?
Yeah. I mean, think about your DNA as the broadcast signal. That's the genetic information. And epigenetics, which is influenced by the environment, acts like these tuning knobs on your TV.
Okay.
And those can adjust, the volume, the picture quality,
right.
And in this case, gene expression.
Okay.
But, without actually changing that underlying broadcast.
And a really great example of this in action that's mentioned in the book is this Duke University study with the agouti mice.
Oh, the agouti mice.
Yeah.
That was a really striking example.
Yeah.
And if I'm remembering this correctly, these were genetically identical mice.
Exactly.
But they looked totally different depending on what their mothers ate during pregnancy.
It is.
So tell me a little more about that. Like what happened there?
So these mothers who got these extra nutrients called methyl groups, which are these small chemical tags that attach to DNA and kind of influence whether a gene is turned on or off, they gave birth to these healthy brown mice.
Okay.
And then the other mice who didn't get the supplements gave birth to offspring that were yellow and obese.
Right.
But here's the thing. They all had the same agouti gene,
right,
which is the one linked to the yellow fur and the obesity.
So it was the mother's diet that was literally changing the expression of the offspring's genes, even though the DNA was the same.
Exactly.
Wow, that's really powerful. So what does all of this mean then for human health? I mean, because the excerpt kind of touches on this, in the context of major diseases like cancer and cardiovascular disease.
Yeah. If we zoom out and think about it in terms of our health, big picture, this is really significant because the book points out that only a small percentage of these cases, like cancer and cardiovascular disease, I think like 5%, can be attributed to just our genes alone.
Wow.
So this suggests that these epigenetic changes that we've been talking about, which are driven by the environment and our lifestyle choices, play a much bigger role in whether or not we develop these conditions.
Right.
I mean, even if we think about genes like BRCA1 and BRCA2, which are linked to breast cancer, the vast majority of those cases aren't because someone inherited those genes.
Okay.
So it's really something to think about.
So the environment's not just passively around us. it's actively communicating with our genes, influencing how they behave.
Yeah.
So then the discussion kind of moves to this really fascinating idea of the intelligent cell and the role of the cell membrane. And this seems like a real shift away from the idea of the nucleus being the control center.
Yeah. It's this idea that cells are not just like these tiny little machines,
Right,
but almost miniature humans in a way. I mean, he even talks about, observing these single-celled organisms like paramecia and amoeba and how they exhibit these behaviors that suggest almost like an awareness.
wow.
And contrary to what we kind of learned, that the nucleus is the brain, the book argues that the cell membrane is really the primary control center.
Okay, the membrane is the brain.
Yeah.
That's pretty radical. What's the evidence for that? Because I know there was something in here about this experiment called enucleation.
Yeah. So enucleation is the process of removing the nucleus from the cell. So if the nucleus was really the brain,
Right.
you'd think the cell would just stop functioning.
Right.
But what these experiments showed was that these cells could still move and respond to stimuli for a certain amount of time.
Even without a nucleus.
Yeah.
So the membrane itself possesses a level of intelligence and control.
That's right.
Interesting. So how does this intelligent membrane actually work? I mean, there's this really, I don't know, memorable analogy in here about a bread and butter sandwich with olives.
Yeah, I love that one. So picture the phospholipid bilayer, which is, the main structure of the cell membrane. That's like the bread and butter.
Okay.
And the fatty hydrophobic butter in the middle acts like a selective barrier.
Okay.
So it's controlling what can pass in and out easily. And then the olives are like the integral membrane proteins.
Okay.
And they are, embedded within this lipid bilayer and act as these channels and receptors.
Okay.
So they allow specific molecule
Like nutrients.
Nutrients, exactly.
information.
Yep.
To cross the membrane.
So the olives have different functions. Like
Right.
some are open pathways and others are waiting for a specific signal.
That's right. Some form these channels, allowing passage based on size and charge. Those are like an open olive.
Okay.
And then others are receptors, and they can bind to specific signaling molecules from the environment,
Okay.
which triggers a change in the cell's behavior. So that's like a closed olive that only opens with the right key.
Right.
Now, here's what's really interesting.
Yeah.
These receptor proteins can even perceive energy fields,
What?
vibrational frequencies.
Mm-hmm.
So it's suggesting that influences beyond just physical molecules
Like,
could be impacting cellular behavior,
yeah.
even our thoughts.
Wow. So our thoughts could be having this direct influence on our cells
That's possible.
through these membrane receptors.
Yeah.
That's powerful. And then the discussion kind of shifts to how these individual cells come together to form these larger systems through this idea of cooperation and community. Yeah. And this is really about, life isn't just about individual survival,
Right.
but about this power of working together. Single-celled organisms realize that by cooperating and specializing, they could really improve their chances of survival. And the book even compares it to Henry Ford's assembly line.
Okay. So just like, workers on an assembly line focus on specific jobs,
Yeah.
so do the individual cells in our bodies.
That's right. And it highlights that every function in the human body, whether it's your nervous system, your digestion, immune response, everything is ultimately carried out at the level of individual cells. We're really a cooperative community of around 50 trillion cellular citizens.
That's amazing.
It's incredible.
So our overall health then reflects the well-being of this vast cellular collective.
Exactly. Almost like a collective amoebic consciousness.
Wow. I mean,
Yeah.
that really changes how you think about your body, not just this thing, but it's this incredible community.
Right.
So the conversation then takes this turn into quantum physics and the understanding that matter is fundamentally energy.
Right.
This seems like a big shift in perspective.
It is. The shift from classical Newtonian physics to quantum physics revealed that this world that we perceive as being so solid is actually made up of energy. And of course, Einstein's famous equation, E equals mc work, captures this perfectly.
Yeah.
And at the atomic level, matter isn't solid in the way that we think of it.
Yep.
It's more like these swirling vortices of energy that are constantly vibrating and radiating these unique energy signatures.
So if we could zoom in close enough, we wouldn't see tiny little solid particles. You see these fields of energy.
Exactly.
The excerpt uses this great analogy of a dust devil to kind of illustrate that.
Yeah. It looks like this solid column of dust, but if you remove the dust, you're left with this invisible vortex of air.
Right.
And similarly, atoms are composed of these incredibly small energy vortices.
Okay.
And so from a distance, an atom looks like a fuzzy sphere. But as you get closer, the physical structure kind of dissolves into mostly empty space and energy.
So this understanding of energy has some pretty big implications for how we view biology and medicine.
Yeah.
The excerpt contrasts conventional biology's focus on the material with this long-standing recognition of energy in Eastern medicine.
Right. So conventional Western biology has largely overlooked this role of energy in health and disease because it's focused on this material view. But Eastern medicine has recognized energy for thousands of years, things like meridians and qi.
Yeah.
And it, makes you wonder why some approaches to healing are more effective than others.
Yeah, it's fascinating how this quantum physics, which is a relatively new development in science, seems to align with these ancient Eastern philosophies.
Yeah, it really is.
So the excerpt talks about, how these vibrational frequencies can actually affect matter. And it even gives examples like an opera singer shattering a glass.
Right. Because vibrational frequencies carry information and can influence the physical and chemical properties of atoms. And those examples of constructive and destructive interference really illustrate this. So just like an opera singer can shatter a glass
by hitting its specific resonant frequency.
Yeah. And they use sound waves to break up kidney stones non-invasively.
Wow.
So our own systems could potentially be influenced by these subtle energy vibrations.
I mean, it sounds like there's this whole area of potential therapeutic applications that we're only just starting to kind of explore.
Absolutely.
So this leads us to the role of the mind and beliefs in shaping our biology.
Yeah.
And this is huge, right? The placebo effect is a key piece of evidence here.
It really is. It's this demonstration of the connection between our mind and body. The excerpt mentions the Baylor Medical College study on knee surgery and these patients who got the sham surgery.
So they thought they had surgery, but they didn't.
Exactly.
And they experienced just as much improvement as those who actually had the real surgery.
Isn't that crazy?
It's amazing. So the belief that they received treatment was enough to trigger a healing response. And it's not just surgery. I mean, the excerpt talks about the placebo effect in studies on antidepressants.
Yeah. Research has consistently shown that a big part of the effectiveness of antidepressants is actually the placebo effect.
Wow.
So again, it highlights how powerful our beliefs can be.
Yeah. So then the book brings in this idea of growth and protection responses at the cellular level.
Right.
And how these relate to our overall well-being.
Yeah.
So at this really basic cellular level, our cells are either in a state of growth or protection.
That's right. So they're either taking in nutrients, expanding, or they're kind of defending against threats. But the key is that they can't really do both at the same time.
Right. Just like you can't, focus on building and repairing if you're running away from danger.
Exactly. It's one or the other.
Right.
And so when we are in a state of fear or stress, what's called the fight or flight response.
Our body diverts energy away from growth and repair to, survival.
Right.
And the excerpt talks about the role of the HPA axis, which is the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis,
right?
Our central stress response system.
Okay, so that's the system that kicks in when we feel threatened,
right?
And it's helpful, in these short bursts. But chronic activation is not good.
It's not good.
Yeah.
The analogy they use in the book is the Cold War air raid siren.
Oh, right.
So an acute stress response is important for dealing with threats,
right?
But prolonged stress, like a constantly blaring siren, keeps the body in this state of alert,
right,
and inhibits growth and repair and even higher level cognitive function.
Wow. So it's like the community in that analogy, constantly living with this threat, they eventually just exhaust their resources. So this really underscores how important it is to manage our stress and cultivate a state of growth.
So then the discussion goes into this fascinating territory of the subconscious mind and how our beliefs and behaviors get programmed in there.
Right. So the subconscious mind is this powerful database
Oh,
where our learned behaviors and beliefs, attitudes are recorded. And this starts really early in life through observation and repetition. Like they use this example of chimpanzee infants learning from their mothers just by watching.
so a lot of what we do and believe is essentially learned programming that runs in the background
Yeah,
without us even realizing it.
absolutely. Like habits, instinctive reactions.
Right, right.
So the subconscious is like this non-judgmental repository of these stimulus response programs.
Okay.
So when it encounters a stimulus, it triggers the learned response.
Automatically.
Yeah, bypassing conscious thought. And they use this great analogy of Machu Picchu to illustrate the sheer processing power of the subconscious compared to the conscious mind.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. That was really cool. So the conscious mind is like this tiny, tiny pinpoint of awareness
Yes.
compared to the massive processing capacity of the subconscious.
It's really remarkable.
And the subconscious operates in the present moment,
Right.
while the conscious mind can kind of, think about the past, plan for the future.
Okay.
And this can create real challenges when our conscious desires clash with this subconscious programming.
Exactly. Because our subconscious programming, which we often get from, absorbing the beliefs and behaviors of others,
Right.
can create these limitations and self-sabotaging patterns
Oh, wow.
that conflict with our conscious goals.
Yeah.
And, we have free will through our conscious mind to observe, intervene, create new responses.
But that takes a lot of work.
It does. It requires focus and effort to override those deeply ingrained subconscious patterns.
Right. That's why personal change is so difficult.
Yeah, exactly.
So the discussion then takes this interesting turn towards the idea of responsible parenthood as a form of genetic engineering.
Yeah. It's this idea that parents are like genetic engineers in the months leading up to conception and during pregnancy.
Oh, okay.
And this is through a process called genomic imprinting. So the environment experienced by the parents, especially things like stress levels, nutrition, well-being, can influence the activity of certain genes that are going to shape the developing child.
So the conditions even before a child is conceived can have a lasting impact on their biology.
Yeah. It's a big responsibility.
Huge responsibility.
Yeah.
So the environment experienced by the parents, and particularly the mother, can affect the child's developing mind and body. And then during pregnancy, the conditions within the womb, the mother's stress, nutrition, her emotional state,
It matters.
shape the baby's brain, personality, even their capacity for logical thought. The excerpt really emphasizes the impact of maternal stress on the fetus through the HPA axis and the release of stress hormones.
Right. When a mother experiences stress, her HPA axis is activated
Right.
and releases these hormones like cortisol, which can cross the placenta.
Okay, so the fetus.
Yeah. And this can have long-term consequences for the child, including, an increased risk of low birth weight, susceptibility to diseases like diabetes, cardiovascular disease later in life.
Wow.
They even talk about how this prenatal environment can influence a child's IQ.
Yeah. So much for the idea that intelligence is solely determined by genetics.
Right.
This places a significant responsibility on parents to be mindful of their own well-being.
Absolutely.
Even before conception.
Yeah.
Given the profound impact it can have on their future children.
Yeah.
The discussion then goes into this kind of, I don't know, almost like philosophical, maybe even spiritual realm.
Yeah.
About the spiritual nature of being.
Yeah. And this is where it gets really interesting. The book proposes that we are spiritual beings inhabiting a physical body. And they use these analogies like a TV receiving a broadcast signal or Mars rovers receiving instructions from Earth.
Okay.
So it's suggesting that our physical body, our identity receptors, are the means by which our self interacts with and receives information from the environment, from this, higher intelligence or, whatever you want to call it, all that is.
So our physical form is like the antenna,
and
our spiritual essence is the signal.
Exactly.
And our individual identities are like unique channels.
Yeah, like different frequencies within a larger spectrum.
The different colors coming through a prism.
That's a great way to put it.
It's really, this definitely moves beyond a purely materialistic view of biology.
Oh, it does.
And opens up some pretty profound questions.
Yeah.
So then the conversation introduces this concept of fractal geometry.
Yeah.
And its relevance to understanding evolution.
Right. And fractal geometry is this really fascinating way to look at the irregular patterns that we see throughout nature and in evolution itself. So fractal patterns have this thing called self-similarity, meaning that the same basic shapes and patterns repeat at different scales, like the branching of a tree, the network of our blood vessels, even coastlines.
So how does this idea of self-similarity relate to this increasing surface area of cell membranes
Yeah.
and the development of consciousness?
Well, the book suggests a link between the evolution of consciousness and this increase in surface area,
Okay.
because more surface area allows for more integral membrane proteins, those olives,
Right.
which are the units of perception and intelligence at the cellular level.
Mm-hmm.
And fractal geometry, with this ability to maximize surface area, provides this really efficient way for cells to increase their perceptive capabilities.
Okay.
So evolution itself can be seen as this fractal process with these repeating patterns driving the expansion of consciousness.
So these seemingly random patterns in nature might actually reflect an underlying order
Exactly.
that supports the growth of consciousness.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
So the conversation then kind of tackles this Darwinian concept of survival of the fittest and proposes this really interesting alternative, survival of the lovingest.
Yeah. It challenges the idea that competition and struggle are the main drivers of evolution and
Right.
suggests that cooperation, compassion, love are actually more effective and ethical paths for human progress and survival. And they give examples like the peaceful bonobo chimpanzees,
Right.
who resolve conflicts through connection rather than aggression.
All right.
And there have even been studies on baboons showing that these aggressive groups can become more cooperative.
Wow.
So the idea is that as humans at the top of the food chain, we're not destined for violence.
Right.
And that building societies based on love and cooperation is essential for our well-being and the planet.
Yeah, I mean, this is a much more hopeful and empowering vision
It is, yeah.
of human potential. So the discussion touches on these significant challenges of overcoming our subconscious programming. And the example of the pianist David Helfgott is pretty powerful.
Yeah. It's a beautiful illustration of the power of the subconscious mind and the energy it takes to override those deep programs, especially when they're tied to emotional experiences.
Yeah.
And his struggles during the performance highlight this conflict between his conscious desire for success and then these powerful subconscious fears
Right.
that were still there.
It seems like these deeply rooted subconscious limitations can be the biggest obstacle to achieving our goals.
They often are.
And consciously trying to override them is so difficult.
Yeah, it takes a lot of work.
The excerpt mentions these methods like energy psychology as potential tools to reprogram these behaviors.
Yeah. And these approaches recognize that just thinking your way out of it
Right.
isn't always effective. You have to kind of access and reprogram these deeper beliefs and emotional patterns
Right.
more directly.
And then they emphasize how important it is for parents to instill healthy programming from the beginning,
Yeah, that's really key.
preventing the negative programming from taking root in the first place.
It's so much easier than trying to undo it later.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So this leads us to the final points about personal responsibility
Yeah.
and this potential for science and spirituality to reunite.
That's powerful.
It is.
The book really emphasizes that once we become aware of this influence that we have, we become responsible
Right.
for our experience. So intellectual understanding is a first step, but
Yeah.
it's not enough.
Right.
We need to make a conscious effort
Right.
and take action, challenge our limiting beliefs
To create lasting change.
for ourselves and future generations.
And the power of love is highlighted again as this catalyst for growth and healing.
It's essential.
And finally, Dr. Lipton talks about his own journey of realizing our spiritual nature
Yeah.
through his scientific understanding. It is. So he talks about this historical separation of science and spirituality. And it suggests that a reconciliation is not only possible,
The necessary.
necessary
Yeah.
for a better world. And he argues that modern science, particularly quantum physics, is revealing a view of the universe that's more aligned with ancient spiritual wisdom.
It's true.
It's emphasizing interconnectedness and consciousness throughout nature.
It's all connected.
And he also kind of cautions against this purely materialistic scientific approach
Yeah.
that has led to some of our current environmental challenges.
Right. We need to reunite with this sense of spirituality and interconnectedness for our collective future.
So our deep dive into these excerpts from La Biologia de la Carencia brings us to a really powerful conclusion.
It does.
Our beliefs and the environment have a far more profound impact on our biology and reality
Absolutely.
than we might have imagined.
And we realize.
We have this incredible power to influence our own lives and the lives of future generations just by becoming more aware of our beliefs and the impact of our surroundings.
It's true. And it makes you think, if our cells operate through cooperation and
Hmm.
respond to their environment, what could happen if we embrace those same principles
You
on a
bet.
larger scale?
In our communities, in our nations, even our relationship with the planet.
Yeah, it's a big question to ponder.
It is. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Until our next exploration, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep exploring the incredible depths within and around you.